Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Once again, this evening I have with me Mr. Ravi Joshi, who's going to give us a historical insight as to what happened in West Asia, Middle East, as you'd like to call it. There is always a certain amount of history that blends into the present and the reality. In the last episode, one big point that we had spoken about were the badly drawn borders of the Middle East or the West Asia. How does history join into that particular aspect, and what can we learn from the history which will help us understand the present? So this is the part 2 of this episode. There are going to be lots of parts, so please stay tuned. If you've not seen the part 1, recommend you do so that you can actually go through this series right here on Dev Talks. Sir, good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Aadi. Thank you. We spoke broadly about the geographical context of West Asia, as to what exactly we mean by West Asia, and we defined it that part of Asia which starts with Iran and ends with the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, covering the southern Persian Gulf countries and the countries on the northern Persian Gulf, which includes Saudi Arabia and the various Gulf monarchies, and on the northern side, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and Jordan. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief history of uh, the the consolidation of the Ottoman power in Middle East or in West Asia, and the challenges it faces from the European powers. Now, let me tell your viewers that we are dealing with a particular period, or the 18th century, where there was four major European empires. There was, of course, the British Empire, whose monarchy is as old as 1059. It goes back to almost 2,000 years. And then we have the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Central Europe. Then we have Ottoman Empire in Southern Europe. And in Eastern Europe, we have the Tsarist Russian Empire. Okay. So this is the broad scenario in Europe in 18th century. Now, uh, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Tsarist empires were not as uh, hugely colonial powers as Britain was or as Ottoman Empire was. Okay, Britain was the most important colonial power. It was really an imperial power in Europe. And the only challenge came to European or British Empire was from the Portuguese and the French in the areas it was trying to occupy. That is Asia mainly. So there was Spanish Empire which went into Latin America. We are not concerned about that. But here, when these countries are coming into Asia, they are meeting or they are confronting an already existing empire, that is the Ottoman Empire, which had built up its powerful colonies in entire West Asia, starting from a small little town called Bursa in Anatolia, wherein a young man called Osman the First, in Turkic language is called Uthman, and that is how his name becomes Ottoman in English. So Osman first and his son Orhan, they start building up a little bit of a petty kingdom in Anatolia, and their major power comes when their grandchildren occupy and rule Constantinople. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 is the beginning of the rise of the Ottoman Empire. And for about nearly 300 years, the Ottoman Empire concentrated on increasing its areas in Europe, in Christian Europe, okay, particularly in the Balkan region, which is Romania, Bulgaria, which is then Yugoslavia and all that. It captured up to Budapest, and it threatened the Austro-Hungarian Empire when its armies came up to the gates of Vienna. That was what 1658. From there, they were pushed back. They were repelled, and their territories still remain largely confined to Eastern Europe, which later was there was confrontation or contestation with Russia. Now, let us jump to 18th century. In the beginning of the 18th century, or let's say the two major events happened. One is the French Revolution of 1789, and on the same year, Selim III occupies the throne of the Ottoman Empire. So he starts consolidating his regime in. He starts focusing towards Asia instead of Europe, and there is a necessity as to why he does that, because Napoleon Bonaparte, who was still serving in the French army at that time, starts an expeditionary force to capture southern Europe and captures Italy, then goes on to the Mediterranean and captures Malta, and then comes forward and attacks Egypt. So he comes down up to Egypt in 1798, within about 9 years of the French Revolution. Okay, this is actually the first time a non-Muslim Christian power threatens Ottoman Empire in its backyard. Okay, now by that time, the Egypt was actually being governed not exactly by the Ottoman family descendants, but they had let it out to the this tribe called the Mamluks. The Mamluks are actually the slave dynasty. They were picked up from various parts of Eastern Europe, like Croatia, Bosnia, the Muslim parts of Eastern Europe, and sent to these countries to govern these provinces on behalf of the Ottoman Empire. And they governed with the help of troops called the Janissaries. The Janissaries are known as the most ruthless soldiers ever to take part in a war, because they don't take prisoners. They just kill mercilessly. And their terror was widespread, and it actually controlled large parts of West Asia. And Egypt was in the hands of Mamluks. Okay. Now, when Napoleon comes to invade Egypt, he tells the people of Egypt that I have nothing against the Ottoman Empire, because he thought that the Arabs have some kind of a piety or pious relationship with the Ottoman Empire, because he's also the Caliph of Islam, a Caliphate of Islam. He is a religious leader, spiritual leader. So Napoleon does a very subtle nuancing when he comes there, and he says, I have come to liberate you from your Mamluks, from your slave kings who have been oppressing you, and we will spread knowledge and prosperity and economic development, and we'll bring Western ideas into your countries. So, in fact, he goes to the Al Azhar University, which was at that time a very important center of learning and knowledge, and he tells the Grand Sharif of Al Azhar University that we have full faith in you. We are disciples of Prophet Muhammad. We respect your faith and Islam, and we have nothing against it. And we have come with our own ideas, basically, to trade and to develop friendly relations with your people. So, anyway, the Al Azhar University Grand Sharif is not greatly impressed. But one important thing, very fascinating thing that Napoleon does, which no European ruler ever did to any colony, he comes to Egypt with about 150 or 165 savants or scholars from France. And the scholars the team includes historians, geographers, linguists, anthropologists, sociologists, and people who study nature, who study ancient antiquities of history, all kinds of things. So he tells them, you stay back here and you create an encyclopedia of Egypt. This is a fascinating thing. In fact, this becomes a very important thing for the French relationship with Egypt. These savants created a 43-volume encyclopedia called the Description de l'Egypte. So they create these volumes. So from that time onwards, Egypt and the Ottoman Empire's colonies become a fascinating subject for European study. So Europeans get interested in this. So that is actually the first French intrusion, or first non-Muslim Christian intrusion into Ottoman Empire.
Hmm.
Soon English forces land, English Navy lands in Egyptian port, and General Horatio Nelson uh, routs Napoleon's navy, and Napoleon is forced to retreat to Paris within about a few months. And Napoleon also retreats to France because there is a power struggle going on in France,
Yeah.
and he goes to and takes power in France. After the French Revolution, there has been a Jacobean terror, and there has been a lot of confusion in France. And he goes and stabilizes French state by capturing power. So that is end of Napoleon's brief intrusion into Ottoman Empire. But I must mention here that Napoleon also tried to go to Syria, but he was prevented by British forces. So here you must remember that Britain had already established colonies in Asia, that is in India. The East India Company was given the permission to trade on 31st December 1699 by Queen Victoria. By 1700, in the beginning of 1700, East India Company already has come to India to start trading. And of course, in the name of trading, they do all kinds of things, and they slowly capture power in various parts of India. So now, Egypt is an important route for British Navy to come to India. So they were very much interested to see that no other European power comes to occupy Egypt. Now, this much. We'll stop at the European influence, but here I want to talk about Sultan Selim. Sultan Selim III, who had come to power in the same year as the French Revolution, 1789, in Istanbul, he was greatly influenced by the French king Louis XVI, who was actually overthrown by the revolution. And he was having secret correspondence with him, and he was influenced by the French ideas, particularly of the French Revolution, of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Not that he was going to implement those ideas in his country, but he wanted to establish links with European countries in order to learn and to develop his own country on those lines. In fact, he was the first one to set up 5 embassies in 5 European capitals, and on a mutual basis, he allowed them also to set up embassies in his country. So this relationship was the first time established by Selim III. Now we come, let us examine how the Ottoman Empire slowly increases its power in West Asia. West Asia, it was it was already spread up to Egypt, but soon after Napoleon's intrusion into Egypt, other colonies of Ottoman Empire are also threatened. That is what is called the Maghreb region, from Morocco to Tunisia to Libya. They all come under foreign influence and foreign occupation. Actually, by about 1830 to 1870s, slowly Ottoman Empire starts losing the Maghreb region. Morocco falls into French hands, Tunisia falls into French hands, Libya falls into Italian hands, and Britain comes to take administrative control of Egypt by 1870s. So the Ottoman Empire is gradually losing its West Asian flanks of the Maghreb region, but it has still got very good control over the region on this side of the Sinai Peninsula. That is from what is now known as Israel and Jordan, from that side to Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran. Iran is a very different country. Here I must mention that Iran was never a part of the Ottoman Empire. Iran had its own Safavid dynasty, which was established by Sultan Selim in 1507, and then it lasted for nearly 200 years. And under Sultan Selim and Sultan Abbas, the Safavid dynasty enlarged its territory by capturing large parts of Iraq. There was always a confrontation between the Safavids and the Ottomans. And the Safavid dynasty Iran never came under Ottoman occupation. But there was Russia gaining influence in Iran in order to, and Safavids gave concessions to Russia in order to face the attacks from the Ottomans. Now, talking about concessions, I must mention here the Ottoman Empire, even at its height, started giving concessions to the Europeans to trade. But the kind of concessions that the French took in the Ottoman Empire were very different from trading concessions. They almost set up consulates in those countries wherever there was Christian communities. You must remember that the Ottoman Empire was a multi-ethnic, multi-racial,
Yes, yes.
multi-religious communities.
Mm.
Okay, there were not only Muslims, there were Christians, there were Jews, there was Coptic Christians, there was Orthodox Christians, there was Druze, and there was Alawites, there was Shiites. So all kinds of people lived in the Ottoman Empire, and they lived in a rather peaceful and harmonious manner without ethnic strife. If at all there were killings, it were mainly because of wars, the wars which were imposed upon the Ottoman Empire by the European powers. So between these communities themselves, there was largely peaceful, harmonious relationship. And the Ottomans maintained a kind of a secular attitude towards these communities, not interfering in their religious sphere. They were not greatly converted or into conversion, and they were allowed to practice their faith. So this gave the European Christians certain amount of leeway to come and say, we will spread our education to these people. Okay, so France, in the name of concessions, or it is called capitulations, started setting up consulates in those countries, particularly in the Levant region, Syria and Lebanon, to protect the Catholic communities of these Ottoman kingdoms. Similarly, Britain was only taking care of the small community of the Jews and the Druze. Okay,
Mm.
the Russians set up similar concessions or consulates to protect Orthodox Christians, and
Okay.
the Greeks also took up consulates in order to protect Greek Christians. So this is how slowly they started getting they got foothold into the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman king sitting in Istanbul said, it's fine. I mean, as long as they're not occupying our land or threatening our kingdom, it's fine. So they let it happen. So this was the situation in the Ottoman kingdoms in around 1870s. Okay. Now let us come to the 19th century. Now, in the 19th century, what happens? Britain starts to play a major role in this region. Already, in India, after the 1857 War of Independence, East India Company is thrown out, and Britain takes direct control over India.
Uh-huh.
And similarly, Britain starts taking direct control over Egypt, and occupying certain important ports on the Suez Canal region. Egypt is an important landmark, land post for them, and similarly they get rights over Haifa port, which is now in Jerusalem, and Accra port, which is now in Saudi Arabia, and they start building up ports in that region as well as in the Persian Gulf. In the Persian Gulf, they enter into treaty relationships with small kingdoms like the Kingdom of Kuwait, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and the King of
Mm.
Hejaz in Saudi Arabia, and also the King of Basra in Iraq.
Iraq.
Uh, and they also get a concession from the Iranians in the port of Bandar Abbas, which is an important port, which is named after Sultan Abbas of the Safavid dynasty. So European countries are slowly increasing their footprint. And The Ottoman Empire is on the decline by the beginning of the 19th century because, and not exactly because there's any kind of Arab nationalism arising in this region, but its own internal problems. There are serious threats to the caliphate, the kingdoms. And by about middle of 19th century, there is a movement by 1850s, 1870s. There is a movement by the young Turks in Turkey for for a progressive liberal government and a liberal political system. So they threaten to undermine the Sultan's power. So this is the challenge that the Ottoman sultans are facing. So they neglect the care of their regimes. In the meanwhile, of course, there have been minor wars, but we will talk about the major war, the First World War, in the next episode. That will that with that we will come to the creation of the modern West Asia. Okay. So at this point, I will stop. And if you want me to elaborate on any particular issue so far, please go ahead.
I think, honestly, sir, I didn't think that history could be condensed, but you've really done it. I must congratulate you. It's a really, because we've touched upon some very hard factors where you've brought about this thing, and uncannily there is a resemblance between what happened with India in terms of the divide and rule and what happened with this region in terms of the divide and rule.
Oh,
So
yes,
it's
yes, yes.
it's it's quite interesting that, and that's I couldn't stop smiling the minute that thing. I wanted to actually interject at right that time, but I let you finish. Uh, the divide and rule itself is again the baseline to the entire problem within the Middle
Yes,
East
exactly.
as well.
In fact, yes, in my next episode, when I come to the beginnings of the problems relating to the First World War, I'll mention to you as to what kind of a perfidious and treacherous role the British played in this region. It is shocking. I mean, they did nothing similar to India. They could have played merry hell with our 552 kings we had, and they could have divided our country into 500 pieces. But fortunately, that did not happen. I don't know whether it's because of them or because of us. But in West Asia, they did exactly that. They promised so many things to so many people, and they stabbed them in the back. They did not fulfill the promise. I will
They,
talk about.
yeah, there was no central leadership, I guess, in West Asia that could take the mantle up and say, "Hey, listen, hang on, you know, don't do this. We'll handle this." Or which is, I guess, the difference between the leadership of Mr. Patel and everybody who kind of coalesced the country together. So, which brings me to a very important question of I call it the medieval end of the medieval times into the modern era. Uh, the realization in terms of British colonialism, I'm sure, was there. So when the king or the leaders or the kings of that area literally allowed the Europeans to come inside and do all this stuff, didn't they know what the Europeans were doing in other parts of the world? I mean, I could
No,
ask the same question with regards to India as well, but
actually, I must tell you one thing: the West Asian entire landscape was unfortunately not very well educated. In fact, education came up only due to the policies of certain sultans of the caliphate. They are the ones who took the lead in introducing certain educational reforms. And I think I'll mention whether it's Sultan Abdul Hamid or one of them. I will get that next time. But it had to come from outside. There was no, the kind of things that you're talking about. We talk like this because we are aware of European history. In European history, there has been Renaissance, there has been Reformation, Counter Reformation. There's been a whole revolution of intellectual ideas. That kind of a thing never happened in the Ottoman Empire. That is the tragedy of this region. There's been no great, there have been thinkers in the Arab world, but they were all based in Paris. There are half a dozen thinkers talking about Arab Renaissance, Arab nationalism, and contributing to a pan-Islamic Arab movement. All this, but all those fellows were sitting in Paris. They were not in Cairo or they were not in Arabia anywhere. So their influence was very limited. And in fact, the printing press was not allowed by the sultans of the Ottoman Empire in this region till 1740s. And in 1740s, they allowed the printing press in some of the parts of Asia only to print the Quran, uh, and not any other books. They did not allow them to publish any books. And that experiment also closed down within about 40 years. By 1780, the printing presses were closed. So and the only communities which were getting into the printing business were the Jews and the Druze community and the Christians. They were the ones. In fact, the first colleges and educational universities were set up by France and Britain in this region. Uh, the French set up a university in Syria. Okay, and in fact, I have been to that university in Damascus. So, and the only university of fame in this region was Al Azhar University in Egypt. And I met some students of Al Azhar University, like my good friend of Maldives president, Mohammad Nasheed, was a student of Al Azhar University. And he told me once that you go there and you feel they're all zombies who are coming out of these universities because they know nothing other than the Quran. So, and this guy is telling me this in the 21st century, man. So we imagine the state of education in this region. So and the world, the European world, kept them in the dark, and so did the Ottoman monarchs, Ottoman kings. They were also not bothered to educate them and bring about a revolution in their social and academic life. So that is the problem.
It belittles me that this one tiny country and one tiny region of Europe with these little countries were able to actually do stuff like this into.
Oh yes, yes, yes. Well, they played very hell with this region.
Yeah,
And
and the impact of it is still around, and it's amazing that this thing is there. So my last question to you: the Ottomans were famous for, or the Turkics, if I may, and a lot of the Arabic Islamist scholars, leaders today blame the Turks for not actually having developed any sort of education system, written any books post
correct.
the 12th century. Uh, just
Yeah.
did not evolve Islam the way it should have evolved, just like any other religion has evolved and merged into the modern times. Would you, I would, would you blame or would you associate that particular feature that we see within Islam today because of this particular factor, sir?
No, you have to make a distinction between Turkic nationalism and Arab nationalism. Okay. The Ottoman Empire, when the Ottoman Empire was at its peak, this distinction did not exist. And they did not allow, or nor did any Arab nationalism generate on its own in this region. Okay. So it started developing much later, almost in the middle of the 19th century, when the Britain encouraged this kind of thinking and the scholars started intermingling with the Europeans. Then they started, actually, nationalism itself as a force comes up in Europe only after the French Revolution. Okay, and then till Napoleonic wars are responsible for the unification of Italy and Germany. You know, that is, nationalism basically comes up as so many hundreds of tribes getting together and calling themselves a nation.
Hmm.
So nationalism is a post-French Revolution phenomena in Europe. So, but that did not happen in Arab lands for another 200 years. So this, your question about whether Turkey prevented it, or Ottoman Empire prevented it, or the Arabs did not pick it up. I mean, it's both. It's a kind of a complementary situation. I mean, neither Turkey encouraged it, nor Arabs actually were yearning for it. No, there was no great searching for this kind of a knowledge, and nationalism in Arabia comes up only at the time, at the beginning of the First World War, when these kingdoms, little kingdoms, start to realize, "Arey, if I help these Britishers at this particular point here, I'll be able to increase my empire." that's how
Ah,
that's how the Grand Sharif of Mecca, Sharif Hussein Ibn Ali, says, "I will provide you 30,000 troops." He tells the British ambassador, British viceroy in Egypt, "I'll provide you 30,000 troops, but after the war, you will allow me to occupy entire Saudi Arabia and Basra and Iraq and Jordan, etc., etc." Okay, so that kind of a nationalism happens here out of sheer expediency, out of deal making. So that is the tragedy of it all, and that is why even today these countries are suffering from a lack of a strong national tendency, which can unite the peoples against their rulers. you know, and the rulers are also happy to keep them, disunited as long as they can continue in power.
I guess the hunt for power, so which
Yeah,
is I guess the key for the entire game, sir. Because at the end of it, just to bolte हैं ना, in Hindi there's a saying गद्दी रख लो,
हाँ,
just
बिल्कुल
keep your
बिल्कुल
गद्दी रख लो अपनी, बाकी सब देखेंगे.
बिल्कुल
So
बिल्कुल.
enlightening, I must say. As I said, and I'm going to repeat at the cost of being repetitive, I still going to say I didn't think that you could compress history. But congratulations for doing that, sir. Because at the end of it, that's what we need to know. In this particular series, what we are trying to do is, I guess, light a little fire amongst the listeners to
Correct,
listen, do their own research, and
correct.
then get involved in the future programs where we actually discuss. So we've reached somewhere around, just before probably the turn of the 18th to the 19th
Yeah,
to the 20th
we already come to the
century.
19th century. Next
Yeah,
next episode, I will start come directly to the beginnings of the World War. Okay,
First World War.
the reasons for the creation of the World War, and then the fall of the decline and the fall of the Ottoman Empire.
They call it the Great War, and a lot of people call it the war that shouldn't have been. Let's
Yes,
find out in the next episode. Sir, thank you so much. Wonderful talk, and hoping to join back with you in the next week or some few days after that, and set this set the history in play. Thank you so much, sir, and Jai Hind.
thank you.